Nina Gill, thank you so much for your presence. And Michael Thürer, thank you so much for your presence. We have an important subject to discuss here at the European level, the situation of SMEs and also the taxation that is somehow avoided by some kind of companies, let's say. What do you think is to be done tomorrow in this area?
Well, if I may kick off,
yes,
Michelle,
please.
I think in terms of taxation, I mean, the European Parliament has been taking a lead with your report and other reports to ensure there's a level playing field. I mean, we have too many multinational companies that evade taxation, and it's the small and medium-sized companies, you know, that pay. And so they get an undue burden because often they don't have the mechanisms or the able to get very fancy accountant who can find, you know, ways of avoiding paying tax. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that the SMEs have a level playing field so that, you know, they pay taxation according to what they earn and produce, but so do the multinationals, so that the multinationals really pay their fair share and contribute into the national funds for services that their employees use, and they make use of those services as well. So I'm really pleased that the Parliament has set up special committees to address this, and we've got some very good reports, including Michelle's.
What did your report bring to this situation?
Actually, the European Parliament has passed two special reports on tax avoidance and tax evasion. And our major finding is that the combination of 28 partly over-complex national taxation regulations create loopholes which can be used especially by multinational companies, and therefore we need a common legal basis. And from that point of view, if you look at it, the European Commission and the European legislators, that is the European Parliament and the Council, made a major step forward in introducing measures to stop tax evasion. So the automatic information exchange is a very important column. But the second one is even more important, that is a common consolidated corporate tax base, so that we have a common tax base and that we have a fair competition between member states on the rates.
We have to look also at the third countries, because we know that there are some escapes in those areas also.
Yeah, indeed, and that is something we have been doing, and we're saying that we need global action on this front. And the OECD have in fact undertaken a report, and they are producing and getting companies, multinationals but other nationalities to sign up to this. And I think it's important we keep the pressure that it's not Europe alone, that there are no loopholes. That's why we think it's important to deal with tax havens. You know, until we address the tax havens, companies, multinationals will always find mechanisms to avoid paying taxes and being able to exploit one country after another. So I think it's important that individual member states maybe are not that well placed, where the European Union can. And we can also make it an issue. I mean, the European Union is one of the biggest aid donors world round, and we can make it conditional that there aren't those practices in other countries, and so we can encourage them to, you know, start changing their thinking, because it will benefit those countries directly, because they will get income to be able to provide services to their people. So it's not some kind of bureaucratic action. It's like, you know, if companies don't pay their tax in Romania, it's the Romanian people who suffer.
Suffering, of course, yeah.
Because they don't get income, and it's the Romanian SMEs who will suffer because they have unfair competition, and it's not fair on them, because, you know, they're the ones who are working hard, creating jobs and, you know, growing the economy, where somebody else comes in, takes the benefits and pays nothing.
So we have to do something at the national level also, each of us.
First of all, Nina pointed out the international dimension is very important, and there is a competition aspect. So we have clear evidence that the disadvantage for small and medium-sized enterprises who are not able or who are not willing to do these cross-country tax evasion schemes, they have a disadvantage of 25 to 30%. And from that point of view, it's absolutely necessary that the European Commission, as competition administration, does something, and the Commissioner Margrethe Vestager, therefore, was right to make investigations and to put some fines on those who have, at least, like in Ireland, Apple, paid only a tax quota of 0.0005%. So if there is a company having 1 million profit and paying only 50 euros, that is not fair in comparison to all the small and medium-sized companies. And exactly, we have to tackle that problem on the European level, but also on the member state level, because the member states are responsible for tax collection, and they have to improve their administration in this way as well.
Looking at each state, let's say, in the European Union, have you seen some differences in applying the European legislation and therefore having troubles with these great companies, big companies that are trying somehow to avoid taxation or are making evasion?
Indeed. I mean, there are a lot of examples that we don't have consistent implementation of EU laws amongst the different member states. So different countries perhaps give, some will perhaps increase the legislation. It's called gold plating. So they take the EU directive and then they change it. Others will maybe perhaps water it down a bit. So the idea is that the European Union, what they don't try and do is to give like one size fits all. They try and give countries
some directions, actually,
so there is a directive, but they say there's a room to maneuver. But the downside of that room to maneuver is the implementation is patchy and it's not always applied consistently. So that is not the responsibility of the EU. That's a responsibility of the member states, because if they don't, if let's say Romania applies something very strictly, but one of your neighbours doesn't, it means they're creating a loophole. And it would mean that, perhaps Romania will not get the same level of services or same sort of return as the neighbour might. So that's unfair, basically, and that's what we're trying to get rid of. It's important that we have a similar implementation of the laws that are passed here. And I think that's what the European Parliament needs to focus on much more, on implementation, rather than just looking at producing the laws.
Yeah, I was thinking that this will be your next step, let's say, in order not to have some escapes for those who are not willing to do what they're supposed to do. I will give you a simple example of Romania and Bulgaria regarding the old cars. We used to have some big taxes for the old cars, and the Bulgarians were not. So all of the Romanians were taking their cars to Bulgaria to make the papers and using them in Romania. That's a small example, very easy to be understood by our viewers, but that's the situation also in the taxation case.
If there are differences between taxation, it is very easy to start arbitrage businesses. And if you have a common market with no limits for capital movement, you also need a binding legal framework. And exactly what Nina said was a problem in the past, that the member states who are responsible did not agree on that common legal basis. Therefore, the European Parliament is pushing the European Commission and the Council to make a bigger step forward to implement that, because what we want to have is a framework providing a fair competition, and especially for SMEs who are suffering under bureaucratic burden, it is absolutely necessary that the competitors have have not this huge advantage. And if we look on some multinational companies, US ones, but also European ones and Asian ones, they have a lot of untaxed cash flow somewhere in Bahamas, Bermudas, or Cayman Islands, and then can use it to conquer a market. And their small and medium-sized competitors, they are in a disadvantage, and we want, as a European Parliament, to overcome that disadvantage and to give the small and medium-sized enterprise a level playing field.
Do you think that what you have done, and this is the last question, do you think that what you have done until now in this area is enough?
Well, I think we have very good basis for making sure that there could be that level playing field. We have, as I've said, some very good reports that have been done by the Parliament. Now it is down to the member states, you know. So we've done our side
now.
Yeah, we've done our side, and we're still working on making sure we're closing whatever. You know, there are more reports that are just coming along in the next few months, and that should mean that there's enough framework there for there to be level playing field. But as we said, it is the national governments now who have to make sure they do their job.
I do not completely agree that we are already ready with the legislative framework. Indeed, the common consolidated corporate tax base is still missing. There is no consensus in the European Union to get it. And what we also have to have is the guarantee that there is no profit leaving the European Union untaxed. So there is still a step to go. And as a European Parliament, we made it clear that the European Parliament wants to achieve that. So indeed, the Council and the Commission have now to take on the duty.
Thank you so much for your presence, and I hope